Hey everybody, how's it poppin'? Okay, wait, don't click off of the video just yet. I just couldn't resist opening with that. Half of you probably laughed anyway, so good on you. But yeah, Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition has come, and without a doubt has been a momentous occasion for the series, both in terms of the fact that this game was even made, and the narrative developments worth analyzing for everything surrounding it. Like always, I'll give a spoiler warning sometime before getting into the nitty gritty, but real quick, no spoilers. I gotta say, the story of X was actually better than I was expecting. I mean, I never finished the original back in 2015, so for the past 10 years, some of you guys have been making it seem like the story of base game was absolute dog water. I mean, it's definitely not on the same level as the Number Trilogy storytelling, no, but it does have redeeming qualities that kept me invested through Chapter 12. And from that point, I actually really liked Chapter 13 as an epilogue. I wouldn't say that I loved it, but I really liked it. Though I am well aware of the reception that is kind of mixed right now, and I can relate to some of the confusion many of us are having about the lore implications, along with some of the complaints overall. Like, I do agree this story very much could have been its own game if that was an option. The whole premise of what's going on in the epilogue has a lot of potential to be explored over a much more spread out narrative for sure. But ultimately, what we got still has a ton of heart that genuinely makes it feel like modern Xeno with how reflective it is at times. It's got thematic facets that resonated with me as I was playing, some of which I do connect to base game, despite other parts feeling a bit disjointed. That being said, I think we first gotta briefly look at what kind of place Mira is. What kind of plane of existence we've found ourselves on as base game unfolds. This is the part where we're getting into full-on spoilers in a few seconds, so fair warning to anyone who wants to dip and come back later. So yeah, here we go. Funnily enough, I think we can all agree that we never really found out what was so special about Mira as a planet in a lore-based sense. I think it's an educated guess to say it's been written out to shelve whatever the original X plans were in order to connect to the numbered games, especially given aspects of it were probably repurposed within the numbered games anyway. But even so, getting to revisit the grand scale of Mira was something I was actually craving before this definitive edition was even announced. It's another example of a world that is happening to our characters. A world which imposes itself on you physically and, interestingly enough, existentially, with the questions of how humanity is to chart forward beyond the literal survival we're fighting for. One of the first ideas we're presented to throughout Al's character in Chapter 13 is the notion of needing somewhere to belong, and having that place to be a tether to the greater essence of ourselves. It really fits given we've been struggling this whole time to make Mira a place where humanity belongs in that same deeper sense. At least that's what I felt while playing, at least. But it's also clear to see we're not the only ones working to do this. It's a shared endeavor with all the other life forms we come across on this planet. And yet, in the same way Mira presents these grand physical hurdles we must contend with, a similar challenge presents itself with the social mountains we face. The more you interact and diversify, the more it becomes clear that the barriers to coexist alongside other species, to help each other feel a semblance of belonging on this world, it's just as grand as the physical world that dwarfs you. Really, this theme isn't new to Xenoblade games at all. I think everyone watching knows that at this point, but that sense of scale you must climb over is unique to X in comparison to the other games, and in that, the maturation process of humanity, of life, is also unique to X. I think it's arguably the only Xeno game to visibly show that change to the environment you're constantly coming home to. We see it in the progression of quests and affinity missions as new Xenoforms come to NLA and people grapple with living alongside them. We see both the endearing sentiments and the growing pains. Across many of these personal stories, you see humanity slowly begin to become open-minded to ways of existing never previously considered. And in a way, I think that's kind of the point in making Mira our new home at first. The whole point is to circumvent those barriers which are so prominent, and often lead to misconceptions, assumptions, and prejudice. Of course, maybe this is obvious to some of you given the 10 years you've had to sit with this, and I'm just now getting to the party, but I do feel like this theme is honored to an extent moving forward in the epilogue. Really, I see those connections being threaded through the link between Elma and Al's characters when put together, which is fitting since they have such interesting chemistry, especially in a story with far more reflective character moments than base game. Simply put, the essence of who they are, when looked at side by side, represents, I think, a kind of love or affinity for living that endures the harsh realities of life. Elma is someone who embodies some of the most important ideals of what humanity should strive for. Diplomacy, finding common threads with those who exist differently than you, etc. And I think it's obvious there's a subtle air of compassion she gives off as she carries herself. And yet, whether or not her approach to things is practically ideal as it is on paper is something that's constantly tested through situations in X. Plenty of conflicts could actually spawn intriguing debate on whether diplomacy is even an option, or if appealing to the better nature of your supposed enemy is perhaps a fatal mistake. Obviously, it's a video game, meaning this is an expendable reality, but if someone like Elma actually existed, scratch that, for people whose ideals and temperaments are aligned with someone like Elma, it's worth wondering if you can make those ideals hold up in truly morally conflicting instances, or if it's just another one of life's many illusions. If it is an illusion, if those ideals crumble under pressure when put against the sole act of self-preservation, then maybe we'd be just as disgusting as Elma says when reflecting on how shooting Lao would have been the wrong choice. It's ultimately the fact that she didn't make that choice which proves it's not, though. And I think the fact she needed a bit of convincing also aids in how she felt during her speech while raiding Volataris. Again, I know the overall plight of the epilogue feels disjointed from base game, but it's the fact that Elma does have blind spots in some ways. Yet, through working with and befriending everyone, she can believe in what she stands for, not just as a person, but as someone trying to manifest something meaningful in a hostile reality. And she emphasizes that you don't have to be human to do that. To me, it all makes sense how, if that's the case, Al is the fuel to that burning desire, both in a thematic sense, but also literally, since they straight up used my guy to hop universes. And yeah, in case it wasn't obvious, I love Al. I appreciate his whole vibe, his whole flow even. By nature, we can see his personality is far more laid back compared to Elma. You know, he adds a certain levity to the impending doom that's about to rupture the very fabric of reality. Though I can also understand people feeling like he's a caricature of the optimistic and slightly awkward but charming figure. But even so, I'd say he's very much built as the embodiment of a self-actualized person who knows what they stand for as well, especially in the face of those moral conundrums that challenge ideals. And it kind of shows in how he's contrasted with Blau in the epilogue. So I feel like even if you don't like him, you have to at least appreciate that much about him. I mean, it's true, bro really comes out of nowhere when it comes to the overarching adventures found in X, but he puts people at ease in a way that's welcome and ultimately embodies what he preaches about. The love for not just the world around him, but for all creation. Again, honing in on an affinity for life and the sanctity of existence is not a new theme in the Xeno franchise, but like I alluded to earlier, X's story has its own way of showing how it becomes tempered into something mature. Similar to Elma, that value of love embodying Al exists in stark contrast to the self-preservationist mindset that partially plagues life on Mira during some conflicts we see. And yet it's not a love merely there to serve as a naive infatuation with the world for the sake of feeling good. On the contrary, I think the kind of love Al talks about is, in essence, an affinity which acknowledges the darkness and the wretchedness that embodies reality. It's a perception not afraid to turn away from seeing it. Yet even in spite of those grave pictures, there's still beauty which transcends that darkness. In spite of everything, love for the world is a sentiment which manages to persist beyond that darkness and attempts to reconcile with it. It's not something that guarantees a lack of conflict or strife, but it's an offering you project outwardly nonetheless, even if it's not reciprocated in your lifetime. What's actually interesting is, in thinking about this theme, I was on YouTube looking for cutscenes of the epilogue, because there's no theater mode in XDE, much to everyone's dismay, and I wanted to rewatch a lot of stuff so I could gather my feelings, and I came across a random comment that really resonated with me, mainly because I agreed with it. This person basically said, in response to Al asking if you have it in you to love, they said they honestly didn't know, mainly because of stuff they had been through in life. Despite how uplifting Al's words sound, they weren't sure they could live up to that. And honestly, I kinda agreed with them to some extent. From a personal standpoint, I found what they were saying to be very relatable, and I empathize with their feelings. And to build on that idea for a bit, I look at what Al says as an idea, and despite my core beliefs, which do align with that kind of thinking, and in terms of the Xenoblade series in general, there are days, admittedly, where I don't know if I have it in me to see the best in the world that I live in. I don't mean to sound like a doomer here, but I'd be absolutely remiss to play these games and make these videos while only acting like I live the highest ideals in them. So yeah, there are many moments where I'm genuinely tired with the dysfunction of the world, and I admittedly wonder if humanity is irredeemable to some degree, or if it at least teeters along that line with little regard for whether or not we cross it. Truly, I've been through my fair share of things in life which have left me absolutely exhausted with the way of the world, and I know what that feels like. Even though those feelings don't define me, I still carry a lot of them with me in the back of my head. It's never lost on me what that angst really feels like, how deeply it afflicts us and how it can change us, change our hearts even, along with all the reasons for it. And yet, it's precisely because I and so many people know the weight of all that I believe love in this sense is the affinity we have toward the world, which has somehow persevered through all of our angst. And that's a love that's tempered through it all. Even if it doesn't reveal itself every day of our lives, I do think we all have room within us to tap into that. It's crazy because a harsh reality is that there inevitably will always be a Lao at some point in human history, but conversely, the world will always need someone like Al as well. Otherwise, humanity never has a chance at being its most mature self. Otherwise, the collective that is humanity will never see its spirit blossom, as Elma says. Now, all of this is contrasted with the use of Void's character, who, in his own right, is very much a villain that embodies Xenoblade themes we've already covered. For me, I appreciate it because it still feels Xeno, quote unquote, but I can totally understand people who feel like they just made a variant villain out of antagonists we've already had, especially when, again, his relevancy to X's initial story is only through light illusions, meaning, forget about Al, this guy is definitively a came out of nowhere villain. Like, we can be honest, guys, he's mainly here to give a thematic conundrum to our cast, so he's definitely bottom tier for me overall if we're comparing him to other antagonists, but for what it's worth, Void is very intriguing when it comes to the fact that he's essentially the opposite of what Mobius are in Xenoblade 3. If we're to compare that story for a quick second, Mobius know death, and the essence of finality all too well, yet Void struggles to grasp the concept. This despite the fact that through his quote-unquote contests and running, he is contending with it in the same as many in the Xeno franchise. All the more reason why his current existence is pointless, like Al said. Although in that sense, maybe we can also see how he resembles Mobius with how stuck he is in this sad state of perpetuity without realizing it. He is seemingly a being that craves knowledge, probably a combination of his identity as a genius of Samar and his rebellious act against them to resist the intellectual atrophy imposed on him by said race. Yet what he fails to realize is that having knowledge without interpreting it in a meaningful way is pretty useless. Void only had an analytical intrigue with death, yet amassing all that data without giving a will to it doesn't amount to anything. In this case, the data in question being the movement from existence to non-existence. Failing to contend with the sentiments attached to that doesn't let you decide what to project out into the world. But having an affinity for it, having an affinity for the layers of reality as they're made known to you, does. I think part of it has to do with Void's acceptance for being alone, as Al says. See, when you're completely isolated, your existence doesn't occur in reference to anything or anyone else, meaning it's easy to register your own perception as the be-all end-all for what's possible in any reality. It's easy to view it as infallible. So it's no wonder Void didn't see non-existence as death, given he hasn't experienced that at all. It's the equivalent of real people who go, well, this hasn't happened in my life, so it must not be real. Thus resulting in him looking for others to aid in an explanation that he could perceive in himself above all else, and thus making his actual death scene all the more funny upon realizing the nature of finality that comes with death. I mean, if I'm being honest here, this is low-key a Looney Tunes type death. Like, the little what he says after Al tells him it's final is just hilarious. It's like one of those characters that runs off a cliff and then looks down right before falling. But in any case, to some degree, you could say Void's whole thing is ironically being devoid of any kind of love or affinity himself, despite being in an easy position to tap into it. But regardless, I actually don't mind having to find a new world because of him. I mean, I'm definitely bummed to see Mira go. I really am. I just wasn't surprised it happened while playing everything for the first time. I kind of figured they were going to tie everything into the main universe in some way, which I will say has led to some very funny debate among everyone given the ending. Like, I literally sat there and knew right away that these rings were going to be the talk of the town for God knows how long. To put it simply, I personally would love for this new planet to be the reformed world that we see at the end of Future Redeemed, but I'm also totally fine if it's not. Thematically speaking, I think it would be great to know that all of those wills trying to endure across lifetimes in these games have converged to a new beginning, a new starting line per se, especially given, at least in my head, that Noah, Mio, and by extension Ouroboros are kind of also tapping into the collective unconscious, just in a far less concentrated way. At least that's how I'm reasoning it. Because if you remember, Origin is based off of Ontos, which has siphoned power from the conduit, and then Ionios or Ouroboros cores are partially made from that, thus allowing users to interlink, which is kind of like a mini version of tapping into a being's consciousness. And then we're also made aware how the potency of the power is amplified by a coalescence of will across millennia. To me, it fits, though I don't reckon debates on stringent lore will let up now that we have X continuity to weave into all this. All I know is that I'm not upset if you tell me that the Ares beats Ouroboros in a raw power scaling contest. In any case, it's mainly the deeper significance that I'm into, and I think we get enough of that after having wrapped everything. Again, I don't blame anyone for seeing X's story as a bit of a hodgepodge, but it's got the heart that you really need for a Xeno game. It reminds us that what saves us is the will to persist through it all, and it's our shared affinity, our shared love that makes that happen, whether it's in this world or the next.